the expected meeting between the US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and the Chinese Minister of Defense, Ms. Admiral Dong, in Singapore at the Shangri-La Dialogue is a very important meeting because the two defense ministers haven't met face to face for about 2 years. And it is absolutely urgent and important for the Secretary of Defense of the United States and the Chinese Defense Minister to sit together and to look at each other and to talk about their differences and hopefully to overcome them, or at least some of them, and to move in the right direction for both China and the United States. And the Shangri-La Dialogue is probably the most appropriate occasion for them to attend in their own respective capacities, but also to have a side meeting. Therefore, I'm personally very much encouraged to see the two defense ministers who will meet, and we will be very much on high alert to see what exactly they are going to talk about and whether they can overcome any of their differences. I would say from the Chinese perspective, they will emphasize once again this one China policy, and Taiwan is part of China, and no foreign country is going to be allowed to intervene in these cross-strait relations. And the unification of China, sooner or later, and sooner the better, will be achieved, hopefully by peaceful means. Now, the United States is concerned about the rise of China. They have come up with lots of false accusations against China. Sometimes they say they still respect the one China policy, but in substance, they are hollowing out the one China policy. It is also important to note that as a very dangerous gesture, there have been quite a few important military leaders on the American side who claim that they are ready to use force, for example, to intervene in anything which may happen between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait. And while the US government has continued to emphasize that they still respect the one China policy, what exactly they will do in case something really happens across the two sides of the Taiwan Strait, whether they will continue the so-called strategic ambiguity and how ambiguous it will be, for example, and whether the ambiguity is just for the show of it, and what is the real substance of this strategic ambiguity policy. Now, all this, I think, will be very much at the table when the two defense ministers will meet in Shangri-La. And I do hope China and the United States will eventually reach a point that both will recognize the other as an equal, and neither will try to impose its system, ideology, or values onto the other side. If we look at the Shangri-La Dialogue itself, I think over the past several years, there has been a shift. It's no longer exclusively dominated by the United States or the Western countries, because it needs to be realistic and pragmatic. It needs to reflect the realities on the ground. And the rising importance of China should also be given enough weight. So normally, for example, when the Secretary of Defense of the United States and the Chinese Defense Minister both participate, there will be a separation. The Secretary of Defense of the United States may speak on the first day. The Chinese Minister of Defense may speak on the second day. However, I think the focus of the world is really on whether the two defense ministers will meet. I personally believe that the two militaries of the United States and China should meet more often. They need to exchange. They need to improve the mutual understanding of the top brass in the two countries, for example, and they need to have better ways to communicate with each other, especially in terms of great difficulties or in terms of crisis. I think the United States government and the US military have already been accustomed to hold itself out as the leader of the world. Now, whether the rest of the world really accepts that, that's another issue. And I think if you continue to hold yourself out as the leader, presuming that all the others will need to follow your leadership, while you fail to demonstrate the real results of your leadership, and whether you can bring unity to chaos, whether you can solve all the challenges coming out of the war, whether, for example, you can stop the atrocities in Gaza. Otherwise, your leadership is hollow, and the rest of the world will understand that it is self proclaimed leadership rather than generally accepted leadership.